You know, you've written a great and important book. I've been connected to Wall Street really since the 1960s. My father was a stockbroker, and he retired just a year ago. He passed away, this past November. But I've seen a lot through his eyes, and then my 41-year career in the investment world with Templeton and elsewhere. And I used to get stock certificates when I'd buy stocks. In fact, my mom bought some shares of Disney just because she thought the certificate was so pretty and the artwork was so great. But now everything's electronic, everything's held in street name and pooled together. And as you explain this, at some point will likely spell trouble. But how did we get here? Can you explain how we've transitioned from used to getting stock certificates that we owned and put in a safe to where we are now?
It's been a long process, and it has been a deliberate process, executed over more than 50 years. And this began with dematerialization of securities. This was beginning in the really in the late 60s. There was a crisis created called the paperwork crisis. It's interesting when you go back and look at this that I think it was clearly orchestrated. Somehow handling paper certificates became so overwhelming that it was necessary to close the New York Stock Exchange just on Wednesdays. Following this, it took a number of years, but then the Depository Trust Corp was started in 1973. And then there was really no sufficient or significant dematerialization until the 1980s. So somehow everything ran just fine with paper certificates. But the key thing here is that if you have a certificate, there's a very bright line as to who controls it as collateral. If you sign the certificate over to your broker, put it into your account, then you can use it in your margin account to lever up your position. It's very clear that the broker then controls it as collateral. With dematerialization, holding all securities in pools, it then created the possibility for others to use the securities as collateral, which they began doing. Now, some countries, all G30 countries were pushed to dematerialize. Sweden did it in a way that protected investors. So it isn't necessarily the case that by going to electronic records, you can't keep track of who owns what. It's absolutely possible to do. So the next step was a subversion of the law, which was severing the property right to the security. This was done by creating a new concept of a security entitlement. And that was implemented in the Uniform Commercial Code in all 50 states quietly beginning in 1994. This way, there was no discussion at the federal level. Basically, no one has known about this for a few decades. But this security entitlement severs the property right and essentially makes you an unsecured creditor to get your own securities back in the event of bankruptcy in the financial system.
Now, this sounds a lot like what we're familiar with, which is the bail-in at a bank. When you go deposit money in a bank, it no longer is your money. All of a sudden, they owe you that money, and you don't have a right to it. And if the bank fails, we have FDIC insurance and all that. But if the bank fails, it's not your money. You line up as a lender to the bank, and the bankruptcy judge determines when and how you get paid, who gets paid before you and after you, and so forth. Is that the same kind of thing we're talking here?
It is very similar.